Hi. We're going to review second grade history right now so that you will be ready to learn about third grade history tomorrow. Now, go back in your memory and you found out about a king last year. His name was King George. And there he is. And he fought a war with France. He won the war, but after he won the war, he got a bunch of bills. He got bills to pay the soldiers. He has to pay for their food. He has to pay for their uniforms and their guns and bullets. And he thought, he looked into his deep pockets and there was nothing in his pockets. So he thought, how am I going to pay this? So he probably sat in his throne and thought, how am I going to pay these bills? And then he had an idea. Didn't I fight this war for all the colonists that live in America? And he said to himself, I did. So I am going to make them pay me money so I can pay my bills. So, what do all the colonists enjoy over there? Paper. We send them the paper. So I'm going to add money or a tax onto the paper. And so when they pay for the paper, they're going to have to pay King George some extra money. And this was called the stamp tax. And so all the paper that they had in America had to have a little stamp on it, or they couldn't sell it. And so part of the money would go to pay for the paper, and part of it would go to pay for the extra tax. So if they bought some paper, maybe it was $3 worth of paper, but now at the store it costs $3.50. And so that extra money is a tax, and it's going to go to, what's the king's name? George. And that he's going to pay for what? His bills. And so it was called a stamp tax because you had to have this little stamp on the paper. And so that affected lots of things. It affected newspapers, contracts, books, and maps. You need maps. And you need the books. And you need contracts. And you need newspapers. But the colonists said, we're going to close the newspaper. I can't buy newspaper and pay that extra amount. So they closed lots of buildings. And they said, no, we're not going to have that. And so when they brought the money back to King George, he wanted that money. And so you can imagine the ship owner that was going to ship back all that money for the king, and he landed back in England, and he said, and King George asked him to come over to the castle, and he said, well, how much money do you have for me? And this ship owner had to say, well, King George, I don't have any money for you. Why? Said the king. Because the colonists decided to say, no stamped paper for me. They weren't going to buy the paper. So, King George still needs money to pay his bills. So King George sat in his throne a little bit longer, and he thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I have to pay these bills. And he had another brilliant idea. The brilliant idea was to tax the colonists for other things besides the paper. And so this tax was for all the things that was brought from England to America. And there were lots of things. And paint, glass for windows, cloth, and tea. Those are the things that they wanted to tax now. So you can imagine a family goes to town to buy some of these items, and the father says, well, I would like to paint the house and add some windows. And he goes, I think the paint costs, $4. And the guy says, oh no, it costs $5 now. Why? We're taxing it for who? King George. And he says, well, my wife's counting on windows. Can I buy windows instead? Well, I figured they're going to cost like $3 a piece. And the store owner says, they cost $4 a piece now. What? He says they're being taxed by you-know-who, King George. And the wife is counting on buying fabric because the kids' clothes are getting too small. Okay, then I'll buy some cloth and I'll bring it home, and my wife Sally will be really happy about that because at least she can sew. Not so good. That's tax too. Instead of being 50 cents a yard, it's $1 a yard. The extra money goes to our beloved king here. And so, does everybody in the colonies drink in the morning and noon and in the evening? Tea. So he's going to tax the tea. And so the colonists said, we're not going to paint our houses anymore. We're not going to buy these things. And they boycotted them. And that's what happened to those things. They're not going to buy them. They're not going to use them. And a lot of mommies probably were not happy because they were counting on getting paint for their house. Their husband comes home with nothing because he doesn't want to give money to you-know-who. So the wife goes, honey, did you bring home the paint for the house? Not so much, honey. It's being taxed by our king, and so I couldn't afford that. Well, you're at least getting windows, right? Not so much, honey. The windows are too expensive now. We can't afford them. Okay. You were going to get fabric, right? For me to make some new clothes for the kids. Did you get the fabric? And the husband says, honey, I think you better sit down. The wife sits down. And he says, not so much. They tax the fabric. Can't afford the fabric. I'm not paying the king, our king, any extra money. Oh, I think I need a glass. I think I need some tea. It's just getting too much for me, honey. You brought the tea, right? Not so much, honey. They're taxing the tea. So I didn't pick any up. We're not going to pay the king any extra money. Could you imagine this poor wife? She's probably crying now. Well, it didn't work out so well because they taxed all these things and he was expecting a boatload of money coming in. And the boat owner was summoned to the castle to talk to King George. And the boat owner comes into the throne room and he says, hi, King. I'm good to come over to your castle today. I've got good news and bad news. And the king said, well, what's the good news? Oh, it was very calm waters going to America and back. We made very good time. Things went well, bringing all your goods to America. And the ship owner said, well, I need to tell you the bad news. The colonists, they're not liking being taxed. I've got hardly any money for you. The king says, what? You don't have any money for me? And the ship owner says, no, it's not working well taxing those Americans. They're just not liking this. They refuse to buy any of these things that we send them. because they don't want to pay you the extra money. So I think I have to leave now. So he leaves. The king is in a very bad mood, because he's tried to tax him with paper. That didn't work. Now he's going to tax him with all these wonderful things that all the colonists want, but now they don't want them. And so the king thought, what am I going to do? So now he's going to tax just tea. He says, the colonists are only going to buy tea from me, the king. They can't buy tea from anybody else, so I'll get the money because they're going to want the tea. They're going to want the tea. They can't go without it. So, and so the king sends more and more soldiers over there, and this is called the tea tax. And the colonists decide that they're not going to buy the tea from the king. They would go without tea before paying their beloved king so that he can pay his bills. So here's a ship that's in the harbor, and this ship has the tea on it. And they want to make it very clear to the king that this is not working out. So the king sends more and more troops to America to insist that they do pay these taxes, and this is not going well. So they get on board this ship. The very interesting thing is they dress up as Indians so no one knows who went on this ship. And they go down. These men, the dads, get dressed up like Indians, and they meet at the dock, middle of the night. And they are going to put all the crates that have tea in them, drop it into the ocean, and it will sink. And the king will get the idea, don't tax us because we don't like it. And so they very quietly get on to the boat. They look to the left, they look to the right. There's no one on deck. So they very quietly and very carefully take these huge crates of tea and drop it into the ocean. Kerplunk, splash, splash, and it sinks. And they drop all of the tea over. Splash, splash. And this is called a tea party, the Boston Tea Party. Not the usual kind of tea party. So they drop all of it out into the ocean. They sweep up after themselves on deck. They don't leave a mess. And they very quietly get back on to the dock and they go home. No one knows who was participating. So, next morning